Well, hello there, folks. Harold Brennan here, coming to you once again from my little corner of the world, my garage-turned-studio in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome back to After Her Lies, the channel where real people tell real stories about love, loss, and everything in between. Before we dive into today's tale, I've got to say something that breaks this old heart of mine. You know, 96 of you watching this are doing so without hitting that subscribe button. Now, I don't mean to guilt-trip anyone, but it does make an old codger like me feel a bit forgotten, you know? So if you could find it in your hearts to hit that red button down there, ring the bell, and maybe, just maybe, leave me a comment about what you think of today's story. Well, that would mean the world to Harold here. He clears his throat and settles back in his worn leather chair. Now, I'm 67 years old, been retired from the postal service for about 5 years now, and let me tell you, retirement gives you a lot of time to think. Think about the roads taken, the roads not taken, and especially about the people who shaped your journey. Today's story, well, it's about the most complicated love of my life. Not my late wife Martha, bless her soul, but someone who came before her, someone named Rebecca. This channel has dozens of stories, but this one's been eating at me for months. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, settle in, because what I'm about to tell you happened back in 1978, when I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, and thought I knew everything about everything. I was working my first real job at a small accounting firm in downtown Minneapolis. Yeah, I know, not exactly the most exciting place for a young man's adventures, but stick with me here. The firm was called Patterson Associates, run by this old-school gentleman named William Patterson, who insisted everyone wear a tie and call him Sir. It was a Tuesday in October when she walked in. Rebecca Martinez. She had this cascade of dark hair that caught the fluorescent lights just right, wore a burgundy blazer that made her look both professional and, well, let's just say she commanded attention. She was there for a job interview. Patterson was looking for a new secretary since Mrs. Henderson had finally retired after 43 years. Now, I want you to understand something about me at 22. I was shy, awkward, the kind of guy who practiced conversations in the mirror and still managed to stumble over simple sentences when it mattered. But when Rebecca looked at me and smiled, Lord help me, something just clicked. She got the job, of course. Started the following Monday. And suddenly, my mundane little accounting world became a lot more interesting. Rebecca was smart, funny, had this laugh that could light up the whole office. She was 24, had moved to Minneapolis from Santa Fe to start fresh after what she described as complications back home. For 3 months, I worked up the courage to do nothing more than bring her coffee and make small talk about the weather. Real smooth operator, right, folks? But then came the office Christmas party at the Radisson Hotel downtown. I'd had exactly 2 beers, which for skinny little Harold was about 1.5 too many, when I finally asked her to dance. To this day, I can still hear Bing Crosby crooning, "I'll be home for Christmas," as we swayed together on that little makeshift dance floor. She smelled like vanilla, and something else I couldn't quite place. Cinnamon, maybe. "Harold," she said, looking up at me with these deep brown eyes, "you know you don't have to be so nervous around me, right?" And just like that, the ice was broken. We started dating in January of 79. Real dating. Dinner at Ember's restaurant, movies at the Uptown Theatre, long walks around the chain of lakes, even when it was cold enough to freeze your eyelashes. Rebecca had this way of making everything seem like an adventure. She dragged me to art galleries I never would have entered on my own, introduced me to spicy foods that made me sweat, but somehow left me craving more. By March, I was head over heels in love. Started carrying around this little velvet box with a ring I'd bought using 3 months of savings. I had it all planned out. Easter Sunday, we'd go to her favorite spot by Lake Harriet, and I'd propose right there by the bandstand. But life, as you folks watching know all too well, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It was a Thursday afternoon in mid-March when the phone call came to the office. Rebecca answered, as she always did, with that cheerful, "Patterson Associates, this is Rebecca. How may I help you?" But something changed in her voice. The colour drained from her face. She kept saying, "No, no, that's not possible," in this small, scared voice I'd never heard from her before. She hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at nothing. "Becca," I said, using the nickname only I was allowed to call her. "Everything okay?" She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said words that still echo in my head today. "Harold, I need to tell you something, and you're probably going to hate me." Now, remember, folks, this is 1979. No internet, no cell phones, no easy way to dig up information about someone's past. When Rebecca told me she had complications back home, I never pressed for details. I figured everyone deserves their privacy, right? Turns out those complications had a name, David Martinez. As in, her husband? Yeah, you heard that right. The woman I was planning to propose to was married. "But Harold," she said, grabbing my hands across her desk, "it's not what you think." David and I. We separated 2 years ago. I thought he was going to file for divorce. I moved here to start over. I never meant for this to happen. The phone call, she explained, had been from David. He'd tracked her down through some mutual friends and was demanding she come back to Santa Fe. Apparently, he'd never filed those divorce papers, and now he was threatening to cause problems for her if she didn't return. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, not just because she was married, but because she'd kept this from me for months. How do you process something like that at 22? I loved this woman, was ready to build a life with her, and suddenly I didn't know who she really was. "I need some time," I told her, and walked out of the office. Called in sick the next day, and the day after that. But here's the thing about love, folks. It doesn't just disappear because you want it to. And by Sundays, I was miserable. I missed her laugh, missed the way she hummed while filing papers, missed how she'd leave little notes on my desk. So I went to her apartment. Rebecca lived in this converted Victorian house in the Powderhorn neighborhood. When she opened the door, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she was wearing this old University of New Mexico sweatshirt that was about 3 sizes too big. "Harold," she whispered, "I thought I'd never see you again." We talked for hours that night. She told me everything, how she'd married David right out of high school because it seemed like the thing to do, how he'd become controlling and jealous, how she'd finally found the courage to leave but never had the money for a proper divorce. She'd been sending money back to a lawyer in Santa Fe, but David kept finding ways to stall the process. "I should have told you from the beginning," she said, "but I was scared. Scared you'd look at me differently. Scared you'd leave." "I did leave," I pointed out. "But you came back." And that's when she kissed me. Not the gentle, tentative kisses we'd shared before, but something desperate and hungry and full of all the things we couldn't say out loud. I stayed the night, and the next night, and by the end of the week, we'd made a decision that probably sounds crazy to you younger folks, but felt like the only option at the time. We were going to run away together. Not just anywhere, California. Rebecca had a cousin in San Diego who'd offered her a place to stay if she ever needed to get away from David. We figured if we could get to California, establish residency, maybe Rebecca could file for divorce there. Looking back, it was a naive plan. But when you're young and in love and feel like the world is against you, naive plans start to look pretty reasonable. We gave our notice at Patterson Associates, told old Mr. Patterson that we were both pursuing other opportunities. He was suspicious, especially when we both requested our final paychecks on the same day, but he didn't ask too many questions. I sold my beat-up Chevy Nova, and Rebecca sold what little furniture she had. We pooled our money, came to about $800, which seemed like a fortune at the time. Bought a used Ford Pinto. Yes, one of those death traps, but it was what we could afford, and planned to leave on a Friday night in early April. I remember that last day so clearly, folks. Spring was finally coming to Minneapolis, and there was this sense of possibility in the air. Rebecca wore this yellow sundress. First time I'd seen her in anything but work clothes or winter coats. She looked like sunshine incarnate. We were supposed to meet at her apartment at 8 p.m., load up the Pinto, and drive straight through to Colorado for our first night on the road. I showed up at 7:45 with a bag of road trip snacks and a mixtape I'd made of all our songs. Knocked on her door. No answer. Knocked again, louder this time. Nothing. Used the spare key she'd given me and let myself in. The apartment was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. The furniture she hadn't sold was gone. Her clothes, her books, her record collection, even that little cactus she'd brought with her from New Mexico. All of it gone. On the kitchen counter, held down by a salt shaker, was a single piece of paper with my name on it. Inside, in Rebecca's careful handwriting, Harold, David showed up yesterday. He found out about us, and he's threatening to make trouble for you too. I can't let that happen. I'm going back to Santa Fe with him. Please don't try to find me. Please don't hate me. Please forget about me and find someone who can give you the life you deserve. All my love, Ah. I sat on the floor of that empty apartment and cried like a baby. 22 years old, and I felt like my world had ended. But that's not the end of the story, folks. Not by a long shot. I went back to work on Monday, like nothing had happened. Told Mr. Patterson that Rebecca had had a family emergency and wouldn't be returning. Got back into my routine of debits and credits and pretending that I wasn't dying inside. 3 months passed, then 6. I started dating other women, nice girls from church, friends of friends, the usual suspects. But nobody measured up to Rebecca. Nobody made me laugh the way she did. Nobody challenged me to try new things. Nobody felt quite right in my arms. And then, in December of 19... Nice! I got a Christmas card. The return address was Santa Fe, New Mexico. No name, just an address. Inside was a generic holiday card, Season's Greetings, with a picture of a snow-covered pine tree. But written on the inside, in that familiar handwriting, were just 4 words. I miss you too. That was it. No explanation, no return address, nothing that would help me find her. Just those 4 words that made my heart race and my hands shake. I wrote back immediately, sent it to the return address on the envelope. It came back 2 weeks later, marked Return to Sender, no such address. But those 4 words were enough to give me hope, enough to make me start planning something that was either very romantic or very stupid, probably both. I was going to Santa Fe. Now, this was before the internet, remember. Finding someone in a city you'd never been to was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But I had a few clues. Rebecca had mentioned her maiden name was Gonzalez. She'd gone to the University of New Mexico, and she'd worked at a restaurant called Maria's before moving to Minneapolis. I took a week of vacation in February 1980, flew to Albuquerque. First time I'd ever been on a plane, folks. Rented a car and drove to Santa Fe with nothing but hope and stubbornness. Maria's restaurant was still there, tucked into a side street in the historic district. Adobe walls, red, chili ristras, hanging from the vigas. The whole authentic New Mexico experience. I ordered green chili enchiladas and worked up the courage to ask the waitress if she knew Rebecca Gonzalez. "Rebecca," she said, her face lighting up. "Oh, sure. Becca worked here for years before she moved." "Wait, who's asking?" I told her I was an old friend from Minneapolis, trying to reconnect. "Well," she said, lowering her voice, "I probably shouldn't tell you this, but she comes in here sometimes, usually on Tuesdays for lunch, sits at that table over there," she pointed to a corner booth, "orders the same thing every time, sopapillas and honey, like she's trying to recapture something from when she was a kid." My heart started pounding. When was she here last? Last Tuesday, as a matter of fact. It was Monday. I spent that night in a cheap motel room, alternately excited and terrified about what I would say if I saw her. I'd rehearsed 100 different conversations, but none of them seemed right. Tuesday came. I got to Maria's at 11:30 a.m. and ordered coffee, then more coffee, then a plate of food I couldn't eat because my stomach was in knots. At 12:47 p.m., she walked in. She looked different. Thinner, sadder, wearing a simple blue dress and a wedding ring that seemed to weigh down her left hand. But she was still beautiful, still carried herself with that quiet grace that had caught my attention in the first place. She sat at her usual table, ordered her sopapillas, and was stirring honey into a cup of coffee when she looked up and saw me. "Ah!" The spoon clattered to the floor. "Harold?" she whispered, like she was seeing a ghost. I walked over to her table on legs that felt like rubber. "Hi, Becca." She started crying immediately. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but quiet tears that streamed down her cheeks as she stared at me. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I got your Christmas card." "Ah," she looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "I never should have sent that." "Why did you?" She wiped her eyes with her napkin. "Because I think about you every day. Because I hate what I did to you. Because I wanted you to know that leaving wasn't about not loving you." I sat down across from her. "Then why did you leave?" And that's when she told me the rest of the story, the part that still makes my blood boil when I think about it. David hadn't just threatened to make trouble for me, he'd threatened to have me arrested. Apparently, Rebecca was technically still married, and David's twisted logic, our relationship constituted adultery. In 1979, adultery was still a criminal offense in Minnesota. David had hired a private investigator, had photos of Rebecca and me together, and was prepared to file charges that could have cost me my job, my reputation, everything. He said he'd drop the whole thing if I came back to him, Rebecca said. Said we could start over, be a real family. I couldn't let him destroy your life for loving me. So you destroyed mine by leaving instead. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Harold, Are you happy? I interrupted. Are you happy with him? The question seemed to break something inside her. She buried her face in her hands and shook her head. He watches me all the time, she whispered. Checks the mileage on the car, goes through my purse, makes me account for every minute I'm away from the house. I feel like I'm in prison. Then leave him. I can't. He's made it clear what will happen if I try to leave again. What do you mean? She looked around nervously, then leaned closer. Harold, David isn't just controlling. He's dangerous. The night he found out about us, he hurt me. And he promised that next time it wouldn't just be me who got hurt. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He threatened you? He threatened everyone I care about, including you. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the magnitude of what she'd just told me. Here was the woman I loved, trapped in an abusive marriage because she was trying to protect me. "There has to be something we can do," I said finally. Rebecca shook her head. "David has connections, Harold. His brother is a police officer. His cousin works for the district attorney's office. Even if I tried to file charges, who would believe me over them?" But I wasn't ready to give up. Not again. What if we left together? Right now? What if we just got in my rental car and drove away? And go where? He found me in Minneapolis. He'd find me anywhere. Then we'd keep running. She looked at me with such sadness in her eyes. "That's not a life, Harold. I won't let you give up everything for me." "What if I want to?" She reached across the table and took my hand. "Because I love you too much to let you." We talked for 2 more hours. I begged her to come with me. She begged me to let her go. Neither of us was willing to budge. Finally, she stood up to leave. "Don't come looking for me again, Harold," she said. "Please, for both our sakes." "I can't promise that." She leaned down and kissed my forehead, soft and gentle, like a blessing or a goodbye. "Then I'll have to disappear where you can't find me." And she walked out of Maria's restaurant, out of Santa Fe, and out of my life. I flew back to Minneapolis the next day, defeated and heartbroken, in ways I didn't know were possible. Threw myself into work, eventually met Martha at a church social in 1983, and built a good life with a good woman who deserved better than a man still in love with a ghost. But I never stopped thinking about Rebecca. Never stopped wondering if she was okay, if she was happy, if she ever thought about that winter in Minneapolis when we planned to run away together. Martha and I were married for 38 years before cancer took her in 2021. We had 2 kids, 4 grandchildren, a mortgage we paid off, retirement accounts we built together, a normal, stable, loving life. Martha knew about Rebecca. Not all the details, but enough to know that she was competing with a memory she could never quite defeat. And here's the thing that might surprise you folks. Martha won anyway. Not because I forgot about Rebecca, but because Martha showed me that love isn't just passion and drama and running away together. Sometimes love is staying. Sometimes love is choosing each other every day, even when it's boring, even when it's hard, even when there are ghosts in the room. But 6 months ago, something happened that changed everything. I was going through Martha's things, finally getting around to the task I'd been putting off for 2 years, when I found a letter in her jewelry box. A letter addressed to me, in handwriting I recognized, even though I hadn't seen it in over 40 years. The postmark was from Phoenix, Arizona, dated 3 weeks before Martha died. Inside, Rebecca had written, "Harold, I found your wife's obituary online, and I'm so sorry for your loss. Martha looked like a beautiful woman, and I can tell from the article that you had a wonderful life together. I wanted you to know that I think about you often, especially lately. David died last year, lung cancer, and for the first time in 40 years, I'm free. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I never forgot the man who loved me enough to chase me to Santa Fe, and who was wise enough to let me go when I asked him to. If you ever want to talk to an old friend, I'm in the phone book, Rebecca Martinez. I kept his name. Easier that way. Love always. R." There was a phone number at the bottom. I stared at that letter for about an hour before I worked up the courage to dial. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello? Hi, Becca, it's Harold." There was silence for so long, I thought she'd hung up. Then, "Harold? Oh, my God. Oh, my God. You got my letter." We talked for 3 hours that first night. She told me about the 40 years she'd spent as David's prisoner, because that's really what it was. How he'd isolated her from friends and family, monitored her every move, used threats and occasional violence to keep her in line. How she'd survived by creating a small, secret world in her head where she was still that young woman in Minneapolis, still brave enough to believe in love. I told her about Martha, about our kids, about the life I'd built after she'd disappeared, how I'd carried her with me all these years, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what passion felt like. "I should have fought harder for you," I said. "No," she replied. "You should have done exactly what you did. You let me make my choice, even when it broke your heart. That's real love, Harold." We started talking regularly, every few days, then every day, then sometimes twice a day. Just two old people sharing memories, trying to figure out what to do with whatever time we had left. 3 months ago, she came to visit. I picked her up at Sky Harbor Airport on a Tuesday morning. And folks, let me tell you something. 43 years melted away the moment I saw her walk out of that terminal. She was 67, grey-haired, lined with the wear of a difficult life, but she was still Rebecca. Still had that grace, still had that smile that could light up a room. We spent a week together, taking it slow, learning each other all over again. Oh, she met my kids, who were surprisingly understanding about this old romance their father was rekindling. We went to the places I'd discovered in retirement, the Desert Botanical Garden, the Herd Museum, little Mexican restaurants that reminded her of home. On her last night, we were sitting on my back patio, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold, when she asked me a question that stopped my heart. "Harold, do you think we're too old for one more adventure?" "What kind of adventure?" She turned to face me, and in her eyes I saw both the 24-year-old woman who danced with me at that Christmas party and the 67-year-old survivor who'd endured decades of abuse and come out the other side. The kind where we don't let fear make our choices for us. 2 weeks later, she moved to Phoenix. We're taking it slow, folks. We're not kids anymore, and we both carry scars from the lives we've lived. But we're also not wasting whatever time we have left being afraid. Some of you might think we're crazy. 2 senior citizens playing house, trying to recapture something that should have stayed in the past. And maybe you're right. But here's what I've learned in my sickened years. Regret is heavier than risk. The things we don't do, the chances we don't take, the words we don't say, those are the real tragedies. Rebecca and I lost 43 years. We can't get those back. But we have right now. We have tomorrow. We have whatever comes next. And for the first time since that Christmas party in 1978, that feels like enough.